What's up, gamers? No, we're not doing that. Anyway, hi. So my wonderful wife, Anna, convinced me that, what the fuck was that? Anyway, my beautiful wife, Anna, convinced me that I should do this reading, so I'm gonna do it, and I'm doing part 4 of Bad Moon Rising, because this is the chapter that has the fish titty line in it, and, it's just iconic. So that's what we're gonna do. And so I've got that pulled up here. I'm gonna try not to just completely flub the English language, but we're gonna see. We're gonna see what happens. So let's get strapped in. Let's get to it, folks. She collected herself. Though Jim was still watching her with concerned eyes, he had become aware of the sadness in her eyes that she tried hiding from the rest of the world. You know, he spoke, I think I'm feeling good enough that I could probably make this tonic if you can manage to score some seaweed, salmon bones, and fresh seawater. It should help the healing process. She nodded. Yeah, that won't be an issue. Wait, is this some type of spell? Can you use magic? Yeah, he let in nervously. We're not just fish people, we're keepers of the sea and the magic it possesses. She smiled. That's really cool. She felt like she should have had a more meaningful reaction, but she was exhausted. He beamed at her nevertheless, and she realized that it might actually be dangerous to be around this boy. He made her heart flutter way too much. Her eyes studied his face, and it was hard to get enough of the sight. It was so soft, the little layer of fat that covered his body, but the sharp features were still prominent. With the cloudy sunlight filtering in through the window, the dusting of scales on his face looked nothing short of angelic and breathtaking. Before she even realized what she was doing, she cupped his cheek and gently ran her thumb over the scales. They were soft and smooth. He looked startled for only a moment before he melted into the touch. She became aware of her actions and gently took her hand away. I'm going to go get that stuff for you. He nodded before he remembered something, but she was already in the doorframe. Also, he called shyly, something to grind up the bones and seaweed. She nodded with a smile and left the bathroom and looked up to see Duncan in the closet in the bedroom, putting on one of the old flannels. He already had the jeans that fit low on his hips. Her stomach did painful acrobats at the sight. He looked up at her with a smile, a joke clear as day in his eyes. You know, I'm a little concerned with this closet being filled with men's clothes. Is there a man coming back at some point I should be worried about? She smiled and shook her head. No, those are just left over from my dad. Plus, it's hard to come back after you've been 6 feet under for nearly 6 months. Duncan's eyes widened and his mouth dropped. Oh my God. YN, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Fuck. That didn't come out the right way. She meant it as a joke, but it fell flat in her delivery. No, honestly, it's fine. It's been months now, and he was sick. We knew it was coming. Duncan nodded. He knew what she said, but he also knew that mortal or not, death was something that was not easily overcome. He remembered the tears from last night and wondered if that had anything to do with it. He unbuttoned the shirt and approached her. He buttoned the shirt and approached her slowly. He kissed the top of her head and whispered, I'm sure he had to be an amazing man for raising such a kind-hearted woman. She smiled, but felt that pain rip at her heart, and she would do anything for a change of subject right now. Facing her pain was something she was never good at. So, do you have plans for today? I mean, quick side note, this was such a big mood writing this, and I was like trying not to project myself into this reader character. But what's writing without self-projection, am I right? Anyway, getting back to the story. Okay. And he looked at her before deciding that he wasn't going to push the envelope with her today. Yeah, I have some business to attend to and probably grabbing some of my own clothes. Speaking of which, I'm investigating an inquiry for my pack, and this would actually be a perfect place for me to stay. Mind if I stay? It'd be no more than a week or two at max. He just dropped that bomb like it was the most casual thing to ask a stranger who you just met if you could live in their house for a week, but she did have Jim here, and he did save the both of them from Michael. Who knew what else would show up with the merman being here? She nodded. Yeah, sure, that's not a problem. It was better to be safe than sorry. He beamed at her and her heart lurched. What was with all these really cute supernatural beings coming to her house and making her feel things? She wasn't like, wow, okay. Excuse me. She wasn't one to like emotions, really, at all, nor was she one for intimacy. It always felt like a foreign concept, but here were these men that were making her question her beliefs and preconceived notions. I'll see you later then, sweetheart. Don't worry, Michael and I had a talk. He's sleeping anyway. He won't be a bother. She nodded and squeezed his hands. See then, she believed him for some reason. She really did. He left with that, another kiss on the top of her head, and she let out a breath that she didn't even know she was holding. She took a moment to steady herself, and then she was running downstairs, peeking over the pile of blankets on the couch. It was completely still, but she wasn't going to linger in there. She trusted Duncan, not Michael. Grabbing a mason jar, she headed out to the dock. There was a jar of that. She didn't know how much Jim needed, but considering that there was an abundance of it, she wasn't concerned about the quantity that much. It wasn't going to be hard to find the bones or seaweed. There were some bones in the trash from dinner the other night, and there was seaweed sticking to a pair of boots on the boat. Now, back inside, she grabbed the mortar and pestle from the kitchen and dashed upstairs. Being downstairs made her uneasy. She felt safer up here, but she wasn't sure if there was any truth to that feeling, but it did certainly feel right. She came up into the bathroom and presented the ingredients. I hope this is good. She looked a little concerned about it, and Jim smiled excitedly. That's perfect. She had no idea why his words made her feel so good. 'Cause you're in love, you dumb bitch. Anyway, she handed the things to him, and he threw... Okay, sorry, that's a typo. I should really, actually proofread my stories, but you know what? We, in this house, we don't proofread, and we die like men. So, anyway, she handed him the things... Okay, I'm gonna get my shit together, I promise. She handed the things to him and threw the plants and bones together, grinding them up. So what does this do exactly? It'll speed up the healing process, so hopefully I can take my human form and I won't be confined to this tub. His brows were knitted in concentration as he ground the bones and seaweed into a paste. She couldn't help but admire it, the way he looked too intent on his task and the way his arms flexed. Dear God, she needed help. Seeing him grind up fish bones for a spell was turning her on. He looked up at her, smiling at the slight change in her, but it was mostly confusion, not sure what to make of it. He had the paste now, and he added that to the mason jar of water and shook it up. It was an odd grayish-green color. What net? The question died on her lips as he proceeded to drink the whole thing down in one go. Her stomach lurched. That couldn't have been pleasant at all. He was only slightly grimacing. It was impressive. Roll right, now we just need to have to wait a little bit. She hummed before looking at him, taking in his form. She doesn't think that she could get enough of looking at him. He catches her looking, and he smiles shyly. What? Nothing. She shook her head. The lightest shades of pink touch her cheeks. So, are all mer people able to do what you can? He shrugged. Well, give or take, there are some that couldn't do what I did, and they're the more of the physical kind, but there are those that are a lot stronger than I am with magic, but we all have our unique gifts from the ocean. She had to smile. There was a certain draw about that. Magic's a pretty cool gift to have. He chuckled slightly. My sister's always said that my strongest gift was my kind heart, but I don't know if I believe that. I could. She didn't mean for that to come out so quietly or earnestly, but Jim's eyes widened slightly and he averted his gaze, but she could see that light dusting of pink that matched hers just a few moments ago. He bit his lip in trying to hide the smile on his face. Anyway, you have a sister? She figured there was no need to keep him on the hook like that. He nodded. Yeah, a twin. She's pretty great. She's going to be better than I am at everything one day. I feel it. She smiled and grabbed his hand gently. Then I hope we get you out to the water soon. He squeezed her hand softly, but there seemed to be a silent conflict in his eyes, one that she did not fully understand. She realized she got lost in his eyes. They were so They were as deep as the ocean and carried storms within them that she desperately wanted to understand. Should be ready now. She had to blink for a moment before she caught on to his meaning. The potion. Right. They both looked at his wound, and she'd be damned if it didn't look like the stitches needed to come out. Impressive, isn't it? I might not have the healing ability. Okay. Let's try this again. Impressive, isn't it? I might not have the healing abilities of vampires or werewolves, but I can create better spells than them. She almost detected a hint of defensiveness, but she smiled up at him. I'd say they're more impressive. Another cute blush touched his cheeks. I'll go get the box and we'll get these stitches out, yeah? She asked, and he nodded. The sun was starting to get low at the sky. The sun was starting to get low in the sky at this point, and she was getting nervous if she was being honest. She had no idea if Michael was awake, but she had to guess that he wasn't going to attack her. No, wow, words. Let me English. I promise I know how to speak this language. The sun was starting to get low in the sky at this point, and she was getting nervous if she was being honest. She had no idea if Michael was awake, but she had to guess that he was going to attack her. He would have done it already. She moved downstairs to find the medical kit where she left it. Though Michael standing silently in the corner made her jump yet again. Jesus fucking H. Christ, she swore under her breath, and Michael snorted in amusement. She regarded him warily, and he rolled his eyes. I'm not going to hurt you or your little friend. You can relax. What did Duncan say to you that made you change your tune so quickly? None of your goddamn business. She had to bite down the urge to mock him. Fine. I'm going out, he stated simply. Are you coming back? No answer. He just went for the back door, and she was left in slight confusion. She had to shake her head. She decided to grab the box and just get on with it. Upstairs, she was able to get the stitches out with ease, and Jim seemed to be handling it just fine. The area still looked a little rough, but with what Jim did, she wasn't worried about it healing. She wasn't worried about it not healing up. Wow. I swear, I know this language, I promise. Ready for the magic? Thought you already did that, she teased, and he gave her a look before she nodded for him to get on with it. The process seemed painful, if not just by the looks of it, but also the little grunts that left his mouth. The magic slowly allowed him two separate fins that slowly the scales molted to skin, and after about 5 minutes, maybe less, Jim had fully formed legs, and it was rather marvelous to see the change. He wiggled his toes at her, and she laughed. All right, he spoke and stood up on shaky legs, but from her position sitting, his fully naked crotch was nearly in her face, and her cheeks burned bright hot red. She blinked, and he stepped out, giving her some space. Do you have any plans for food? I'm starving. He turned to look at her, and she was still a little shocked. The member wasn't as impressive as Duncan's, but he was still absolutely mouth-watering, and she was trying to get her brain to work again. Yeah, we can go downstairs and make something. Do you want some clothes first? There was a question on his face before looking down and looking at his naked form, then at her clothed one. Right, humans are weird about naked bodies. She didn't really have an answer to that. She had to guess it was weird to a creature like a merperson. I got some things in the closet. Are you sure about that? He asked like he heard the conversation with Duncan, but didn't think about it too much. Yeah, it's fine. So that's how it ended up with her and Jim making dinner downstairs. He panicked when he lit one of the burners and you had to laugh. He defended that they didn't cook in the ocean. He wasn't used to all this fire business. You nearly recreated the scene between Gollum and Sam when he showed his hesitance at cooking the fish. But he only looked at you like you were crazy and you had to laugh. It's a movie, dear. And then you had to explain the concept of movies to him, because the last time he had been on dry land was when he was a child in 1869, which blew your mind to think that this young man in front of you was so old. Finally, you were sitting on the stools at the kitchen island, eating and laughing. He had to admit that cooked fish might be better than what he's had, but he was adamant that she had to try certain mer dishes before there was any official judgment passed. They were done, sitting in a comfortable silence, and not a moment too soon before she got up to take care of the dishes, Jim gently ran his knuckles over the swell of her breast, making a surge of electricity run through her spine. What are you doing? She asked with a nervous laugh. It's just a part of anatomy that we don't have. I'm curious. Did I do something wrong? She was more blown away by the first statement than the question. Mermaids don't have titties? She couldn't help the question evacuating her mouth before she could think about it. We're not mammals, YN. None of us do. It made sense, and she was thinking that over when she felt another curious and innocent touch. Her breath hitched. It felt better than she could have imagined. Is this okay? I mean, she looked at his unsure eyes and melted. Yes it is, but just don't go around touching other people's breasts. I don't think they'd be as cool about it as with me. Why? He asked out of genuine curiosity. I mean, they're really only for feeding our babies and, sexual settings? I mean, you can touch them platonically, but it's just not a good idea to come out of the gate with that. She was trying to control her blush, and she nearly squeaked out when he grew bold enough to give them a firm little squeeze. She wasn't sure if he was just being curious or if he was trying to get fresh with her. They're so soft, he marveled. Can I see them? Now, there was nothing she could do to hide that blush on her face or the heat spreading between her legs, but Jim looked so innocent and earnest she couldn't say no. She nodded and she reached for her shirt and gently pulled it off over her head and unclasped her bra to bear herself to the merman. She tossed the garment off to the side with her shirt and she heard the sharp intake of breath. He was looking at her like a piece of art, and it hurt her chest a little bit to be so revered by another soul. She felt like she deserved to be in the Louvre for the first time in her life. His fingertips traced the swell of flesh gently, like a whisper of a caress, but then his whole hand came up to grope her. Her breath hitched, but now his fingers were exploring her nipple, pulling at it ever so slightly. Her breath was shaky, and he looked up at her. Are you okay? She nodded. Does this have to do with the sexual settings you were talking about earlier? The scent that came off her now and earlier made more sense to him if that was the case. She nodded slowly, not sure how he'd react to that. Can I try one more thing? And then I'll be done, I promise. She was sure that she didn't want him to stop, but panted out a breathy yes. He leaned forward and his lips latched around one of her nipples, sucking it gently into his mouth. Her toes actually curled as she arched her back, wanting more attention from him. He was happy to oblige, and he started sucking harder on her nipple, and a hand came up to give her other breast the same attention he was giving before. Somehow, this right here was better than any sex she's ever had before. Her head was swimming, and she just wanted to melt right into this man, be totally lost. If you like the taste of that, you should try what's between her legs. I can smell it from here. Duncan was leaning against the doorway, and the two of them jumped so hard she nearly came out of her seat. She was slowly starting to cover herself as Duncan slowly approached, but he grabbed her chin between his thumb and forefinger and tilted her face up so he could kiss her. She melted into the kiss entirely, already deciding to let this night go wherever it was going to go. He kissed down her neck, sucking a dark mark on the soft flesh. Jim's now sucking on the other nipple, and she feels like she's melting. It's all too much, and she feels Duncan shift her so that she's now resting against his firm chest. He slides a hand down the front of her pants, and she nearly squeals at the feeling of his fingers brushing against her clit. But that's not the point of this. No. He pushes two thick fingers into her, making her roll her hips. She gasps, but the little whimper of defeat is nearly too much for the werewolf and merman when he pulls his fingers out of her only after only a few pumps. Wow, I swear, the shit's getting good. I need to keep this rhythm. Okay, back to business. He brings his fingers to Jim's lips, which he eagerly accepts them into his mouth, sucking them clean. The lewd groan from his throat is pure sin. Tastes like heaven, doesn't she? Duncan asks, and Jim eagerly nods. Wow, I can't say eagerly tonight, so let's hope I didn't overuse that adverb. I had to think about that for a second. Listen, it's been a long time since I've had an English class, and since then I've also sustained brain damage, so like, I've gotta pass, okay? With a chuckle, Duncan starts pulling the woman's pants and panties off with one swift push. All she could do was lift her hips, and Jim helped pull them off her feet. Duncan's hands spread her thighs, everything being bared for Jim's eyes. That rhymed. Anyway, and he licks his lips as his eyes darken. He wastes no time in going down, licking a slow and careful strip up her hot core. She mules as her hands come down to pull on Jim's hair. Duncan's rubbing her slides slowly and nipping more marks on her neck. Jim is alternating between fucking her with his tongue and sucking on her clit. She's pulling at his hair, begging for more from both of them. There's another presence in the room that Jim and Duncan are aware of before she is. Michael's watching them with an intensely curious gaze. Duncan smiles as he sucks on a particularly harsh mark onto her neck, letting the vampire see his teeth dragging across the delicate skin to entice him. She tastes so fucking sweet. Are you sure you don't want to join us? Duncan asks with a wicked grin. He knows what he's asking from Michael, and he's asking him to share his bed again. If we do, we're going up to that big bed upstairs. I'm not going to debase her in the kitchen like some fucking animals. Deal. Duncan smiled as he practically threw the naked woman over his shoulder and charged upstairs, making her cry out in surprise. Michael rolled his eyes but started ascending the stairs before looking back at the merman. Well, are you coming to finish what you started? His eyes lit up and he was quickly on the heels of the vampire. Duncan already had her spread out on top. What? Wow, I really do need to start proofreading. Oh my god. Okay, Duncan already had her spread out and was on top of her, taking his turn to suck on her nipples. She was squirming under him, but he refused to give her more until the others got there. Michael crawled on the bed after Jim, and they took in that writhing mess. Michael bit back an amused smile. Did you know Duncan and I are legendary lovers? Duncan grinned as he kissed down her body, and the other two looked at Michael in slight disbelief. Really? Legendary lovers? She had a hard time believing that. Sure, they had to be old just like Jim, but to gain that status? I somehow doubt. I somehow doubt that. How can someone... She was cut off by the sensation of Duncan's first lick to her clit, the perfect pressure, something to ignite the fire in her veins. She could only choke out a groan as her hands went helplessly to his hair as his tongue worked in impeccable patterns against the swollen nerves, something that had her hips wriggle with each one. Michael was smirking now as he turned his attention to Jim with a wink. I told you. That was his only warning as he pushed Jim's head down to the bed, bending him over and ripping his pants down. He spread his cheeks, and Jim's eyes widened in alarm, but melted with a gasp when he felt the vampire's tongue swirled over his rosebud again with the perfect pressure. The human and the merman were messes of incoherent sounds as they moved together against their lovers' tongues. Somehow, they found each other's hands and they threaded their fingers together as they writhed in unimaginable pleasure. Duncan's tongue swirled around her clit before sucking it into his mouth, the intensity increasing slowly until he had to pin her hips down to the bed and she was nearly breaking Jim's hand. Michael's tongue was working Jim's tight hole open. His hips were working back on him and he was practically riding his tongue at this point. Michael didn't even... What? How do y'all read this? This is like incoherent. Oh my god. Hold up. What does this even mean? Oh my god, Asher, get your act together. Okay, alright. Michael's tongue was working Jim's tight hole open. Jim's hips were working back on him, and he was practically riding his tongue at this point. He was smiling, enjoying every single lewd and desperate moan dripping from Jim's mouth. His head was swimming. Never felt anything like this before, but the vice-like grip that the woman had on his hand was grounding. The coil in her stomach was tightening up painfully. She was whispering Duncan's name over and over again like a desperate prayer for release. He grinned against her, and without much ceremony, he pushed two fingers into her, curling them to hit that spot. With each breath that got caught in her throat, her body finally seized, and only that strong arm against her hips kept her grounded enough that Duncan could continue his tongue's assault. Her legs were shaking, and the most heavenly moan dripped from her mouth as that coil snapped. Jim looked in wonder, watching her body react in the most primal of ways. Michael stopped to watch this happen, taking in the curves of her body, the way her chest heaved. She looked like a damn work of art. He gently stroked the swell of Jim's ass, letting him know that he wasn't forgotten. Duncan finally raised his head when her body floated down to the sheets, spent. He smiled as he kissed back up her body before meeting her lips. He met her in a slow kiss, letting her taste herself on his lips. It was a lazy kiss, and all she wanted to do was be lost in this moment forever. He finally broke the kiss, and there was a playful, wicked look in his eye. Don't get too comfortable, sweetheart. You still have to take Michael. Her eyebrows lifted in shock, surprise, and trepidation. Michael snorted. Really now? He was pulling away from Jim and crawling. Wow, that's not the right verb tense. Anyway, but he was pulling away from Jim and crawling his way to her, looking like a predator, and she felt like shrinking under his gaze. Duncan laughed, but he was going to Jim, pulling him into his arms, letting him taste her on his lips. Michael took a place between her legs, a smirk growing at her breathless expression. Don't worry, little one. I won't hurt you any more than you want. She swallowed thickly, but the bruise on her neck did fuel a little bitterness. Okay, Duncan was good, but there's no way you can... Her words were cut off again when Michael thrusted into her unexpectedly. He lifted her perfectly... Wow, okay, that was me. I can't read. Okay, let's take this again! Her words were cut off when Michael thrusted into her unexpectedly. He filled her perfectly, a slight burn at taking all of him, but it only served to make her mouth water. He touched every part in her that made her brain short-circuit, and she dug her nails into Jim's hand and the other into Michael's back. Her core felt like it was on fire, and she was already panting as his hips were moving in such a teasing manner. He angled her hips up just a little, and stars formed in her sight. She was panting, and incoherent pleas fell from her mouth, which Michael was happy to oblige, starting to fuck into her. Skin slapping against skin filled the room with its obscene sound. Jim's mouth was hanging open, watching how quickly she was lost in pleasure. He felt Duncan take Michael's place behind him. He turned his head to look over his shoulder, batting his eyes. The other was already wetting his fingers. A devious grin formed on his face. Don't worry, baby. You'll get the same treatment. Jim gulped, and he spread his legs further for Duncan, which pleased him to no end. He started pushing a finger into Jim, making the slightly smaller man whine loudly and grabbing her hand tightly. It was a beautiful sight, but Duncan wanted more sounds from this beautiful creature. He hooked his fingers up, pressing against his prostate. Jim was nearly passing out at the feeling. Duncan leaned down to kiss the back of Jim's neck as his fingers pumped in and out of him, adding another finger, and Jim couldn't stop his panting now. Duncan left a harsh nip on the back of his neck before leaning forward a little to bite and whisper in his ear, "Are you ready to be a good boy for me and take my entire length?" Jim nodded, but he could barely answer more than that. Duncan pulled his fingers free. What a pretty ass you have," Duncan hummed. "I can't wait to have you on my cock," which earned a hot flush from Jim, but his hips ground back, trying to feel Duncan. He lined his cock up with the other's tight hole Wow, who thought I'd be saying that out loud? Anyway, um, he lined his cock up with the other's tight hole before slowly pushing in, letting Jim adjust to his size. Jim was all but howling, but he was pushing himself back against Duncan. Well, aren't you just a cock-hungry slut? Duncan asked as he bottomed out and started pulling on his hair, his hips working slowly before slamming into him. Both of the two that were being fucked sounded like bitches in heat, and Michael and Duncan couldn't be more pleased. They moaned, panted, and all but screamed. She wasn't she wasn't even entirely sure that she could remember her own name. Michael leaned down to kiss her neck, lavishing the soft skin with little nips and a sloppy open mouth kisses before she felt his fangs drag across her skin. His mouth paused briefly before plunging his sharpened canines into her neck, making her cry out in pain, but she relaxed totally into him. The sucking on the wound was surprisingly gentle, and his hips slowed as he fed on her. She let go of Jim's hand to pull him even closer. She was completely under his spell. She bucked her hips against his, needing more stimulation, anything from him, just more. He groaned against her neck and started sucking harder, and his hips started thrusting into her with a force that was certain to bruise her cervix, and a speed that she honestly wasn't sure if it was the blood loss or that was making her see colorful stars. He was lapping up everything her body had to offer him, and she let out a choked groan as her nails dug into his shoulders so deeply they broke skin. He moaned and finally broke the contact from her neck, and he looked down at her with hooded eyes. She whimpered. Somehow this eye contact was the most intimate part of the night. His lips were covered with her blood. A sharp metallic smell was mixing perfectly with the sex that hung in the air. She cupped his cheek, smearing his blood on his face. He looked like an angel of vengeance, a god of death, born from Venus, a savage Adonis, but she could barely breathe. Their connection was so profound in this moment, like two souls becoming one, and time seemed to lose all its meaning. She ran her thumb across his lip, and he sucked the digit into his mouth. That one action brought her back to reality and made her cry out, becoming acutely aware of the coil about to snap for the second time this night. Her hand fell again to find Jim's. Jim was in no better shape. He had the duvet clenched between his teeth, muffling his screams as Duncan had his teeth buried in his neck, holding him in position like a dog keeping his bitch in place. I still can't believe I fucking wrote that and put that in there. Oh my god, who let me do that? I need adult supervision. Okay. Sorry. It's moments like this that I think that maybe I do have ADHD or some attention deficit disorder and I should get that looked into, but Okay, anyway, sorry. Back to the story. Duncan had his teeth buried in his neck, holding him in position like a dog keeping his bitch in place. His hips were fucking into him with an animalistic pace, and Jim was meeting him thrust for thrust. Duncan finally reached around him and grabbed his member that was nearly purple with neglect. All words left him, and his mouth released the blanket in a silent scream. Duncan's hand was twisting over his member before his thumb came to tease the slit that was absolutely weeping with pre-cum. Incoherent screams sounded from his throat. He gripped her hand back, both of them grabbing the other with painful force. Michael's hand slid between their bodies and started teasing her clit, seeing how close she was. Her hips snapped up, and with Duncan tugging on Jim's cock, they timed it so that they were coming together. The two hands grasped tightly as they wrote their highs together. Their walls fluttered and twitched against their respective lovers, making them spill their seed. The room was filled with lewd moans and pants as they all came down from their highs. She wasn't even sure if her legs could work, but she was in no mood to rush. Michael pulled out of her, the sensation being too much for her overstimulated and sore cunt, making her head swim. He pulled her into his chest as Duncan did the same with Jim. Her and Jim were able to rest together, limbs tangled together, and Duncan spooning Jim and Michael behind her. She had to laugh breathlessly. Where the hell did you two learn this? She felt Michael smile against the back of her neck. Just an old friend. Now go to sleep. We're all exhausted. Jim looked like he was already asleep, and Duncan wasn't far behind him. Jim and her hands were still clasping tight, but with her other hand she laced her fingers with Michael's. He tensed slightly at the affection, but slowly cuddled closer with her. With that, she found sleep claiming her. So, there you go. That's me reading this absolute monster of a fic. Um, my throat fucking hurts, so I am going to end this video, and I'm gonna get some motherfucking water. So yeah, I don't know. I guess bye.